And this is life eternal, that they might know thee, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom thou hast sent. Hello and welcome everybody to a new video from Jörg Juggler 66, Hour of the Truth. This is the 79th part of the study Yea Hath God Said, and the 12th part of the reading and discussion of the book A House Built on Sand, of which I am here together with Rob Alcock, the author of the book, and I'm very glad that we can continue. And we are going really deep into the subject today, and this is only a small example of how deep we will go into many side subjects of the book, as I spoke about of last time already when we scratched on the topic of Hildebrand, Gregory the Seventh. There we are going to read a whole book even to make the point absolutely sure. This is also something that Franz mentioning in the reading of today. So for the reading today, then, I will just welcome Rob and see if he has to say something to the introduction of the video today. Hello, Robert, and welcome to the broadcast.
Oh, hello, Jörg. Thank you very much. And yes, I'd like to start this evening by taking a closer look at the so-called beasts that we've been talking about, that are described in Revelation 12 and 13. In the book of Daniel, we saw how there would be 4 beast kingdoms upon the earth, from the reign of King Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon up until the final kingdom of Rome. Revelation 12 describes the first of 3 beasts, which would have control over the earth from when John received the revelation up until the time when Christ would return with the saints to set up a kingdom that would endure forever. The 3 beasts described by John were the 3 phases that the Roman Empire would go through from its rise until its ultimate destruction. The first phase is described in Revelation 12 as a great red dragon having 7 heads, representing the preceding kingdoms that Rome retained features of, and 10 horns and 7 crowns upon his horns. This was the pagan Roman Empire, the first phase of the final kingdom upon the earth. The book of Revelation uses symbolic language, as we read in the first verse, which tells us that God would show his servants things which must come to pass when he signified it by his angel unto his servant John. The description of pagan Rome is unmistakable when we hear how the dragon, or Satan, stood before the woman to devour her child as soon as it was born. We learn a bit later that the child was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and was caught up unto God, unto his throne. There can be no doubt that the child was Jesus, and the dragon, waiting to devour her child, was symbolic language for the fact that King Herod, who was the Roman Jewish client king of Judea, ordered the killing of all male children under 2 years old in the vicinity of Bethlehem, in order to kill the prophesied Messiah, who had recently been born, according to the wise men from the east, who had come to worship the child. This event became known as the slaughter of the innocents. Joseph was warned by the angel of the Lord in a dream to take Jesus and his mother and flee into Egypt, and remain there until further instructions would be given, because Herod was seeking to destroy the child. Following the death of Herod, the angel of the Lord appeared again to Joseph, instructing him to take the young child and his mother into the land of Israel, fulfilling the prophecy in Hosea chapter 11 that states, I called my son out of Egypt. The woman who brought forth the man-child was speaking symbolically of the church, and not literally about Mary. We know this because after the child was caught up unto God and to his throne, speaking of Christ's ascension to heaven following his crucifixion and resurrection, the woman has to flee into the wilderness, where God had prepared a place where she would be nourished for 1260 years. Obviously, this couldn't be speaking about Mary, but Acts chapter 8, together with documented history, bear witness that the true church had to go into hiding to avoid persecution from Rome until the full-scale onslaught of Satan began via the papal inquisitions of the 13th century. We read that the dragon was wroth with the woman and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, a perfect match for Satan's war against the saints through his anointed one, the Antichrist, Pope of Rome. Revelation 13 begins with a description of a beast that rises up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, with 10 crowns upon the horns. This beast is described as being like a leopard, with the feet of a bear, and the mouth of a lion, a clear reference to the first three kingdoms seen in Daniel's dream that represented Babylon, the lion, Medo-Persia, the bear, and Greece, the four-headed leopard. Between them, they had 6 heads, which together with the head of the Roman beast gave us 7 heads in total. These two beasts of Revelation 12 and 13 are almost identical, the only difference being that the crowns have shifted from the heads to the horns. History shows us that this is precisely what happened, because the pagan Roman Empire that was described in Revelation 12 at the time of Jesus was in full control, so the crowns are seen on the heads of the beast. The new beast, or phase of the empire, that is symbolically seen to rise up out of the sea, has the crowns on the horns, because this phase of the Roman Empire was starting to lose control, with the 10 regions that made up the empire starting to gain power and independence. We will call the second phase of the Roman Empire Christian Rome, which lasted from the conversion of Constantine the Great to Christianity in 312 AD until the apparent fall of the Western Empire in 476 AD. From Constantine, Christianity became legally recognized throughout the empire, although the Christianity promoted bore no relationship to the teachings of the apostles. We know for certainty that the second phase of the Roman Empire is that described as the beast from the sea, because only Christian Rome under the Caesars fits the description of a beast rising up, which was the change from open paganism to apparent Christianity, and also the fact that this new beast or phase would receive a deadly wound not long after its rise, which is exactly what was seen only 163 years after Constantine's conversion to Christianity, when the Western Roman Empire appeared to fall. I say appeared to fall because Revelation 13 tells us that the deadly wound was healed, and the beast, referring to Rome itself, the fourth kingdom, was given a mouth speaking great things, and power was given unto him to continue 42 months, or 1260 years in prophecy. This beast would blaspheme against God, and it was given unto him to make war with the saints. The third phase of the Roman Empire is called the beast from the earth, and it precisely matches Daniel's description of the little horn power that would rise from amongst the 10 regions, or horns, that Rome divided into just prior to the rise of the papacy, which will remain in power until Christ's return. Only the papacy fits this description perfectly, as it was the Bishop of Rome who filled the power vacuum left after the one restraining his rise, the Caesars, was taken out of the way, just as Paul had warned about in his second letter to the Thessalonians. Okay, back to you, Jörg.
Yeah, that was quite a story, I have to say.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, you put it all together in 10 minutes, what is described in your book in at least, I think, 2 or 3 chapters.
yeah,
Yeah, it's incredible, and people often say, but the beast out of the earth, that is America, because it is an uninhabited area. This false teaching of the Seventh-day Adventist Church that brought that into fruition.
yeah,
And of course, it means that it is an uninhabited area, but when you look at the Vatican, which actually is that kingdom, little horn, yeah, it is a kingdom. A Vatican is a kingdom, and that is very little inhabited. I think there are only a few hundred maximum inhabitants even today in the Vatican. So that is
right,
scarcely inhabited. So that is a kingdom out of the land. Yeah.
yeah,
You read one part of Revelation where you mentioned the word to continue for 1,203 score days. And this
yes,
is one of the absolute magnificent and most important points that we are going to make this and all coming readings in this regard. Because this little word continue is not mentioned by many people. And if it is mentioned, it is not understood because the time frame is put differently. And that is so important. And this is a point that always comes back to when I see what you and I have studied and what you put together in that book. and what most other people think they have studied and read in their, and have heard of in their churches. It is the deception that is not correctly putting the term continue in its right place. And I remember that some years ago when we were studying this, I said, well, but it says continue. So it didn't even appear to me until that moment that there has to be a certain moment from that starting point and then to continue something. And this starting point was, to make a short story short, put by mostly Seventh-day Adventists in 538. And they said then he continued for 1260 days. And we already established in the readings before that it is absolutely impossible for the 1260 years day of reign of Antichrist could have ended in 1798 or in 1866, 1867, when you take 606, 607 as a variation starting point. It is impossible because we all know when we look around in the world today that Rome rules everything. And that is still again made very visible with the University of Hidden History videos from Eric John Phelps that I put out, where there is absolutely no one else to blame but Rome. And even though the Seventh-day Adventists have even made this video of, probably you know that, Robert, quote, the forgotten dream, where this Daniel chapter 2 is spoken about in a manner like a soldier in the Second World War who was asked by a superior if Hitler wins, and he was a pastor, and he said no. How can you be sure? Well, I am sure because the Bible doesn't say so. And where doesn't the Bible say so? Then he went into, of course, the dream of Nebuchadnezzar and the understanding thereof. And in chapter 2 of Daniel, what that video is all about, and in chapter 7 of Daniel, which you also mentioned because of the beasts, it always deals with the same entities. It deals with the same kingdoms. It deals with the same nations. It deals with the same rule of man in this world. Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. And everybody agrees on Rome is the last. But then all of a sudden, Seventh-day Adventists, most of all, come out and say, yeah, but Rome is the second beast. United States is the second beast of Revelation 13. But Daniel didn't say anything about any other beast but Rome. So
Exactly,
all
yeah.
the beasts have to be Rome, just in a different shape. And history clearly shows us that it is that way, if only we knew true history. And to know that true history, we are going to continue reading your book today, Robert. So thank you very much for that wonderful introduction that puts
Yeah,
us
yeah,
right in the correct place, so that we now are going into the book and continue where we left off last time. You see this blue little marker, see chapter 10. And for continuity's sakes, I want to repeat that last sentence and that last paragraph here. I'm going to read this again from history on. That puts us in after the wonderful introduction from Robert and my little addendum to that. So if that's okay with you, Robert, then I would like to start right here.
That's fine, yeah. Yes, you carry on.
So history shows that this is another confirmation of what happened just prior to the beast receiving the deadly wound. In 312 AD, Constantine the Great became the ruler of Rome after seeing a vision of a cross of light above the sun before winning the Battle of Milvian Bridge. And this Battle of Milvian Bridge is the one that made him emperor, by the way. Yeah, so he conquered. He went on to conquer. Yeah? The following year, that's 313 AD, he legalized Christianity throughout the empire. You have to also remember, I think this is something that we did not speak about, Robert. Maybe we can take a moment. You have the time of the absolutely horrific persecution of the church in 10 years that are also mentioned, I think, in Revelation. And those are years between 303 and 313.
Right.
And here we read that Constantine put an end to that because he legalized, I would say, of course, quote, Christianity, unquote. Yeah?
Yeah.
Because this Christianity, this was poses for Christianity here, is what came out of Rome. This is what actually, when we go really back to the beginning, and Robert already mentioned it, Acts chapter 8. In Acts chapter 8, we have the real founder of the Church of Rome, and that is Simon Magus. Yeah? And there's an interesting book that I read some years ago that Robert and I maybe also want to read together one time, from Ernest L. Martin, Simon Peter versus Simon Magus. It's a very interesting book. It shows that Peter the Apostle was never in Rome, and that the true founder of the Roman Catholic Church actually was this Simon Magus, who we get to know with, or who we get acquainted with in Acts chapter 8. The one who wanted to buy, that's Simony, that's Simon, this name Simon that comes from this Simony, buying ecclesiastical offices or church power. He wanted to buy the power by laying of hands of spreading the Holy Spirit from Peter. That's Acts chapter 8. And this Simon Magus, Peter said to, your money perish with you. This is very, very important. And the church that he founded, because he later went to Rome, that is also documented in the book by Ernest L. Martin, the church that he found, and he made miracles and quote unquote wonders. The Bible speaks of that the devil, speaking of Rome, of the last empire, works miracles and things like that. I just don't come to the right name right now. It says so in 2 Thessalonians and things like that. There Simon Magus starts with, and he bewitches the people, and his quote-unquote Christianity is the Christianity that we read of, that Constantine then is turned to. Because let's be serious for a moment, without any presupposition or any opinion of myself or of Robert. Who has ever had a vision of true Christianity in the way that Constantine had it with the cross? First and for all, real Christianity doesn't use any symbols in that way, and surely not a cross, but a cross and saying the words conquer. Did Jesus Christ ever give anybody any order to conquer? No, he said, go out in the world and bring the good message, bring the New Testament, the evangelical, how do you say that? Bring all the good news, as we call it, bring that into the world. Yeah, but don't conquer. We have to tell the people about the truth, and whether they accept it or they don't, that's not up to us. But we are not to use the sword to convince them of the truth, but that's what Rome does. And that's vested in Simon Magus. So it's just the point that when we read here about Christianity, the following year he legalized Christianity, that Christianity, that Christianity is the Christianity that came out of Rome. This is the false Christianity. As Robert said so very correctly in his introduction, the church, the woman, went into the wilderness. And the wilderness is not Rome. Okay? So, the following year he legalized Christianity throughout the empire, but although professing to quote-unquote Christianity, continued many pagan practices of old, rebranding them to appear Christian, like taking all the false gods of pagan Rome and giving them Christian names and making them quote-unquote saints in that quote-unquote Christian church. That's what we still have today. And there's a list of all these available in books like The Two Babylons from Alexander Hislop, Babylon Mystery Religion from Ralph Woodrow. You can find that everywhere. And you will find a list of minor gods and a list of major gods, and you will find them how they are named today, because today the Roman Catholic Church for every day has a patronate saint. That patronate saint is nothing else but a quote-unquote god of the old pagan empire. Yeah? And this is what was done, rebranding them to appear quote-unquote Christian. Yeah? So that's why it is not Christianity, but it is actually paganized Christianity, if you can say that. It has nothing to do with Christianity itself. Anyway, it didn't take long for this leaven to spread. Constantine convened councils. Well, the very first one, as we spoke already about, is the Council of Nicaea. That was called for by Constantine. He invited all the prelates from the Eastern and from the Western Church to that. He presided that council, and he addressed the saints at that council. He was the leading person of that council. Of Nicaea and of coming councils after that too, by the way. There were 75 councils between 325 of Nicaea and 381 in Constantinople. So take that into account. That's even more than one council a year in that time. So Constantine convened councils to dictate doctrine to be followed throughout quote-unquote Christendom. It was under Constantine that the false doctrine of the Trinity was agreed upon, and that was already starting in the Council of Nicaea with his address to the saints there. He also reinstituted the Sabbath and changed it from the seventh day of the week to the first day, Sunday, in honor of the Roman god Sol Invictus, causing people to again be subject to the law that Christ had fulfilled. Yeah, Rome is making people, putting people under legalism, under law. And that's exactly, by the way, the same thing that Seventh-day Adventists do with their false teaching. But we come to that at a later part. This was the falling away spoken of by Paul in his letter to the Thessalonians, chapter 2, as you remember, 2 Thessalonians 2, and was a precursor to the revealing of the man of sin. Only 150 years after the Council of Nicaea, so that's in 470 something, 476 we speak about now, this newly emerging phase of the Roman fourth beast suffered a deadly wound when the Western Roman Empire fell in 476 AD, and the crowns found themselves on the 10 horns that made up the now divided empire. Now, Robert, I think this is a moment where we have to pause for a moment and tell the people about the deadly wound. Because there is so much deception in this world going on about this deadly wound that is mentioned in Revelation 13. And most people don't understand that this deadly seeming wound, let's call it, was afflicted to the pagan Roman Empire in 476 AD. Do you have anything to say on that subject?
Yes, I mean, it's as we sort of mentioned in the introduction slightly, this was the new phase that was rising up, which we're calling Christian Rome, which was from Constantine up until the head wound, which was in 476 AD. Because Revelation 12, it's clearly talking about the pagan Roman Empire, which was around at the time of Jesus. The beast talked about in Revelation 12 is all about the time when Jesus was crucified and when he was raised up to heaven. So we know that's clearly the pagan Roman Empire. And then in Revelation 13, we see this new beast rising up. So it's obviously something different to the pagan Roman Empire. And the only power that was rising at that time that was different to the pagan Roman Empire was this Christian Rome under the emperors under Constantine. That was this fake form of Christianity. And in Revelation 13, it talks about this beast rising up. And then immediately the beast receives a head wound. And then the wound was healed and all the world marvels after the beast. And it's only after that that we see that the beast is given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies and power given unto him to continue this 40 and 2 months, or 1260 years. So we know that that's clearly talking about the papacy, this mouth speaking great things. So obviously the papacy came about after the head wound, whereas the Seventh-day Adventist Church talk about the fact that it was the papacy that received the head wound. So it just doesn't make any sense at all that the SDA Church takes everything out of order in order to fit their doctrine. And it sounds plausible on the surface, but when you look at the order of events in Revelation 13, it's very clear that it's impossible for the papacy to be the one that receives the head wound. The papacy is the one that healed the head wound, and not the other way around.
So we have pagan Rome until
Yeah.
313.
Huh?
Then by Constantine, who, by the way, even officially was only baptized on his deathbed, which was not in 313, became a quote-unquote Christian, as I just read. And then you have the start of the Christian Rome part, until
Yeah.
in 476, and I think this is very important because I said on the last broadcast, well, you have to consider 323 AD, when
Mhm.
Constantine moved his throne from Rome to Byzantium and built out of Byzantium the new city Constantinople. That also would be a part of where he was taken out of the way.
Right.
But again, when he was really taken out of the way is 476 AD, when the Goths fell into Rome and really abolished the reign of the emperor there, and the emperor of the East really was the one ruling there, and you had in Rome only the Pope, or at that time the Bishop of Rome, for again 130 years, growing until 606. Yeah, that's 130 years from 476 AD, to develop his power to become then the patronate over the Eastern Church as well as the Western Church. So you have this Christian Rome phase actually from 313 to 606, with in it, in 476, in the middle of it, the fall of the absolutely temporal power of Rome by the Goths who came in there. And I think it was Clovis, King Clovis, who came in there, and he became the king of the Franks at that time. That is also a very interesting subject that you can read on in History of Romanism and in History of Protestantism by our R.W. Thompson on the one book and James Atkin Wiley on the other book. So it does never suffice just to read one book, not even Rob's book. Rob's book is a very good basis from which you can go to other books to deepen your knowledge in that stuff. But just the question, Robert, do you agree with what I just said here?
Yes, I mean, this whole idea of the beast receiving the wound soon after it rises, that is a perfect match for what we saw with this Christian Rome under from the reign of Constantine. And also we talk in scripture that we have two witnesses, and there is another witness to this, which is the basis for a chapter later on in the book. But I'll just mention it quickly now, just one part of it, so it's not giving too much away. But in Revelation 17, where it talks about the seven kings, it says 5 have fallen and one is. The one is being pagan Rome, because pagan Rome was the power in control at the time when the book of Revelation was written. And it says, and the other is not yet come. And when he comes, he must continue a short space. And that is a perfect match for this second phase of the Roman beast, which is this Christian Rome, from the reign of Constantine up until the time when the kingdom, or the empire rather, received the deadly head wound in 476 AD. So between 312, 313 and 476.
And
That
again,
is this.
up to 606, right? Because
Yeah,
then the Pope is, then the Bishop of Rome is first called Pope. So there he
yeah,
enters. There he enters into another level of growth, which is very important, because the growth of the papacy, the growth of the Antichrist, took centuries. It is not a time of weeks, months, or even years, or a few decennia. It is really centuries that it took to grow. And God is very patient in that regard, because he is not under the yoke of time as we are.
Yeah.
So for him, it doesn't matter that much. But with us, we always think, oh, it's written a short time. Oh, that must be 2 years or 24 months or whatever. And it's fast done. No, it's even centuries. And even this is in two different, let's say, phases. You have the phase from 313 to 476, and you have the phase from 476 to 606 AD. And then again, you have the phase from 606 AD to 754, which
Yeah.
we are going to address later on, and 774, sorry, which we are going to
Right.
address later on. And then again, you have the phase from 774 to 1073.
Right.
It's all put in different phases. And when you know true history, it is clear as the sun. It's as clear as daylight. You see it like you cannot see next to it. But with all the false teaching in the world, it is very difficult to see that when you do not have this knowledge, when you didn't study this thing exactly
Right.
into the detail.
Yeah, I think just the important thing to remember was that short period of time, the fact that the 312, 313 until 476, that's just talking about Christian Rome under the power of the Caesars rather than under the power of the Bishop of Rome. That's obviously something separate. So this receiving of the head wound is talking about the fact that that was a completely different phase in a way. The fact that it was the emperor that was controlling Christianity at that time between 312, 313, and 476. So
I'm
obviously,
not disagreeing with you, but I just have a little different view of this. I say this Christian Rome was much longer. It was from 313 to 606 in two phases. In the phase where the emperor still was ruling more or less in Rome until the fall in 476, and after that the power of the Bishop of Rome grew and grew until 606. That was still Christian Rome, but it was not presided by the emperor in Rome anymore that much. He didn't have that power of Rome anymore because it fell with the invasion of the Goths in 476. So
right.
even this Christian Rome, to my understanding, is in two phases. You have the first phase, 303, 476, and you have
Yeah.
476, 606, because 606, 606, the year 606 is a very important milestone in the
Oh, yeah.
development of the papacy. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And 313, as you said, is also a very important point. So you have
Yeah.
pagan Rome from, I don't know, 200 years before Jesus Christ was born until 300 years after. That's for a span of almost 500 years. Then you have the span of almost 300 years between 313 and 606. And then you again have a span of 200 years and then 300 years and so on. It's always put in slices, like peeling the onion.
Mhm. I just think we have to be careful, Jörg, not to lose the meaning of the head wound, because if we're saying it's from 312 till 606, a head wound didn't occur in 606. The head wound occurred in 476 with the apparent fall of the Western Empire. So I think it's
That's true.
important to note, that it's that short period of time, which also fits in with Revelation 17, that it would continue a short space. That there's one reigning now, and then there's another that is not yet come, but when he comes, he must continue a short space. I think that is referring to the fact that it was the Caesars controlling the church, fully controlling the church at that time, and that was the beast that received the head wound, that phase of the Roman beast. So yes, you're right about the 607, but I think that if we concentrate too much on that, we can lose the fact that the head wound occurred in 476. I think that's the important point to remember.
No, I don't think we can lose out of sight that the head wound occurred in 476, because that the Goths invaded Rome, that is an absolute historical fact. Nobody denies that. But what is concerning the power of the papacy there, and who leads the power of the papacy?
Mhm.
Well, when Constantine moved to Byzantium and made it Constantinople in 323, he already was away from Rome. He
Yeah.
led the Roman bishop, more or less, from Byzantium, right?
Yeah.
And it was not Byzantium that fell by the Goths, it was Rome that fell by the Goths.
Yeah.
So between 476 and 606, you still have the emperor from Byzantium or from Constantinople being, quote unquote, boss over the Bishop of Rome.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I
it
think,
is still that same Christianity, quote unquote, it is still that same pagan Christianity, but the only difference is that Rome completely was destroyed and was deprived of any possibility of coming back to power again in the glory of the pagan Caesars as it was before. I think that is very important. That is it was just a power struck, because if you would have had a real power struck, then Constantinople must have fallen. And Constantinople fell, but that's in 1452.
yeah.
That's far in the future. Okay?
Uh-huh.
But I absolutely agree. The head wound can only be 476, with the Goths invading Rome and completely demolishing it.
Yeah.
And the Bishop of Rome had the power before there because he was invested there by Constantine, quote unquote, invested. And of course, ruled by all the emperors of the Eastern time at the same moment. For him, nothing much changed, but it was just all of a sudden were the Goths his rulers and not the emperor anymore, even not the emperor of the Eastern Empire for a moment. The temporal power was completely taken away and given to the Goths and not to Roman anymore. And that, of course, is absolutely the deadly head wound. I agree with that. I just wanted to make sure that people understand that even this went in phases. 313 to 476, you have the invasion of Rome, and then in 606 you have this Emperor Phocas who is giving the power to the Pope of Rome. So this is two phases, I think, in my understanding. You know,
Yeah.
it's
No,
it's
that's
just
correct.
it's just not wrong to consider both point of views. I think.
Mm-hmm. No, that I agree.
Good. So let's read on then. Changing back to the book here. This would have been the end of the beast had it not been for the Bishop of Rome who filled the power vacuum left by the Caesars. And as we established, the Caesars left already before to Constantinople. As Christianity, despite being corrupted, had spread throughout the empire, the Roman bishop was greatly respected, and his spiritual authority and recognition was sought by the horns who would receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. And this, Robert, is also a point that is made very clear in the history of Protestantism by James Atkin Wiley and other books, as we know, that what happened was you have this 10 kingdoms that fell the Roman Empire into, and these kings had no one to address to because their seat of authority was taken away by the Goths, and they then sought quote unquote refuge to the Bishop of Rome, and that led to the growing of the power of the Bishop of Rome. And here we are speaking of the time after 476. This is why, to me, this is such an important date. When you see that whole picture, you see
Mm-hmm.
without that deadly head wound the Goths inflicted on pagan Rome, or Christian Rome, if you will, in 476, all the kings that then came to Rome and wanted, uh, you know, uh, arbitration in their disputes they had and things like that. And they went to Rome and they went to the Roman bishop, and that made his power grow so immense between that and the next 130 years. I think this is a point that is maybe a little bit too much to speak about in this broadcast today, but it is something that you can read about in History of Protestantism by James Atkin Wiley, and you can read in History of Romanism in from Dowling, and probably even in the book that you prepared a few pictures today of The Genius of the Papacy by James Atkin Wiley, right?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
But you say it here in your book yourself. As Christianity, despite of being corrupted, had spread throughout the empire, the Roman bishop was greatly respected. Why? Because all the leaders, the temporal leaders of Rome, that has been inflicted this deadly wound, fell into 10 nations. These leaders came and sought refuge at the Bishop of Rome. That's why he was greatly respected. And therefore his spiritual authority and recognition was sought by the horns. Here it says, you say it by yourself here. These horns, these leaders of these conquered kingdoms by the Goths came to him, who would receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. So the head wound began to heal, and all the world wondered after the beast. And let me assure you, all the world still wonders after the beast today.
Yeah.
The power offered by Satan to Jesus to rule over all the kingdoms of earth was rejected, as Christ had no intention of exchanging the anointing he received in the Jordan from his Father for earthly gain. The offer rejected by Jesus was willingly accepted by the papacy. The Pope became Satan's anointed one, the Antichrist, receiving power, his throne, and great authority from the father of lies, the great red dragon. Again, this little paragraph is so important because it is also dealing with the history that we read in Ernest L. Martin, Simon Magus versus Simon Peter versus Simon the sorcerer. Yeah. When you understand that this Simon Magus is the one who then went to Rome, he is the one who accepted the offer of Satan that Jesus rejected in Luke chapter 4 and Matthew chapter 4, when he was 40 days in the wilderness after his baptism and was, how do you say that? Tried by the devil all these 40 days, and he didn't give in into that. But that Simon Magus did. He was actually the first, what we call Pope today, the first Bishop of Rome. And this is something that you can see even here. The offer rejected by Jesus was willingly accepted by the papacy, by the very first man who posed as the papacy, Simon Magus, when he left Jerusalem after this incident in Acts chapter 8 and went to Rome. The Pope became Satan's anointed one, the Antichrist, as Jesus Christ becomes God's anointed one, Jesus the Christ, receiving power, his throne, and great authority from the father of lies, the great red dragon. And of course, receiving power, his throne, and great authority, exactly the words taken out of Revelation chapter 13. As time went by, Daniel's prophecy was realized when first one horn, the Vandals, then a second, the Ostrogoths, fell to the armies fighting on behalf of the man of sin to remove all threats to his growth to ultimate power and authority. Now, the coming little part here is very, very interesting. And I just read this. Robert, did you listen to my last recording of History of Protestantism?
I haven't listened to it yet. No, I was planning on doing it tonight after this
Oh,
broadcast.
that's a shame, because if you had listened to it, you would have said, yeah, that's exactly what we are speaking about here. This is what James Atkin Wiley deals with in chapter 3 of History of Protestantism in volume 1, book 1st, chapter 3 with the annihilation of the third kingdom, or the third nation that was plucked up by the roots. The Frankish king Charlemagne, who is the son of Pepin, who is the son of Marvin. Yeah, so far it goes until the beginning of the 8th century. You have this Marvin, and then you have his son Pepin, and the son of Pepin is Charlemagne. And he defeated the Lombards on behalf of the Pope, but he did that for the second time. Pepin did it the first time. So there's even more history to this than is written just in this little part. And this is what I'm always saying. Let us take this book as a basic for further studies on our own. It is so important to really get all the details. And when you read History of Protestantism and History of Romanism, you will have all the details. In short, in 774, the Frankish king Charlemagne defeated the Lombards on behalf of the Pope, because the Pope turned to that king for help. And they made a deal. And that deal you can call a conspiracy, because that conspiracy led to a conspiracy against the emperor who was ruling in Constantinople in that time, in the 8th century, to put him out of power. Because the Pope went to Charlemagne and asked him help to defeat the Lombards, and as a reward, the Pope received the city keys of the region of Ravenna, which is very important to understand. And as a bargain, the Pope, made Charlemagne then the first quote-unquote Roman Empire in 800 AD. But there still was an empire in Eastern Rome, in Constantinople. So this was a conspiracy between the king Charlemagne and the Pope. I think it was Stephen III or something, I don't remember the name exactly. It was that conspiracy to reward Charlemagne then with the crown of quote-unquote being emperor of the Roman Empire. And this is such a fascinating story. I'm just reading it in the history of Protestantism and listen to it in Tom's reading of history of Romanism. And, sometimes I just can't give up. I listen to it 2 or 3 times or read the pages 2 or 3 times because everything is so clear all of a sudden. Huh? It's just wonderful. And you have the possibility to just put all this history in one sentence. This is also a very great gift, let me tell you, brother. So in 774 AD, the Frankish king Charlemagne defeated the Lombards on behalf of the Pope, removing the final horn standing in the way of the Pope's rise to supremacy over not just spiritual but also temporal power. Now you can say, okay, that was 774, then in 775 he got all this power. No, it still takes time. As reward for Charlemagne's loyalty and the donation of these conquered lands, first promised to the papacy by his father Pepin, as you say here correctly, yeah, I mentioned that already earlier, he was crowned emperor of the Holy Roman Empire by Pope Leo III on Christmas Day 800 AD. Then, 300 years after the third horn was uprooted, the Lombards, yes?
So I was just thinking this would be a perfect opportunity for those three things from James Aitken Wiley's book that sum up this quite well.
Yes. Okay.
I don't know whether.
Yeah, I have the pictures right here with all the text in it. Wait a second.
Okay, I'm hoping.
I think, is this the first one or?
I don't think that's the first.
No, that's the second one. That's the second one. This is the first one.
It might be the other one that's the first one.
They have one. This one. Okay.
Yes,
this one is the first. Yeah, then 12.3. Yeah, that's right. 12.3, 4, and 5. Okay, so let's read this for a moment. Put the picture of the book here. So this is now from The Genius of the Papacy, James Aitken Wiley. A book, I think, from 1880 or something, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, thereabouts.
It says here, the overthrow of the Ostrogoths and Vandals about this time by the arms of Belisarius contributed also to the expansion of the papacy. The former had established themselves in Italy and the latter in Sardinia and Corsica, and their near presence enabled them to overweight the popedom. But their extirpation by the victorious general of Justinian rid the Pope of these formidable neighbors and tended to the authority as well as the security of the Roman See. But it was in the 8th century that the most considerable addition was made to the temporal power of the popes. So you see there is a big timely difference again between the first two roots being plucked, first two nations plucked up by the roots, the Ostrogoths and the Vandals, and the third. Because this year happened in, what century was it exactly? The 5th?
Well, the Vandals were in 534 AD and the Ostrogoths in 552 AD.
So in the 6th century, yeah.
Yeah.
And now we are speaking of the 8th century. So again, it's 200 years in between. It is not all happening from today and the next thing is happening tomorrow, you know? I just want the listeners to understand that.
Yeah.
Because in the Bible it is written that he plucks up 3 nations by the root, but at that moment the Bible doesn't speak of the time difference that is in there. So people think, oh, that happened instantly at once. 1, 2, 3, and gone. No, it's not. It's centuries between that.
And Jörg, this is where the Seventh-day Adventists also fit in another one instead of the
Yeah, they don't
Lombard.
pit the Lombards. They take
It's the Heruli
the
they
Heruli.
use,
Yeah, yeah.
which fits in just before this 538 AD that they use for the start of the papacy, because they're trying to say the 1260 years started, from after the three horns are plucked up by the roots. So they had to have one start before this, 607 or whatever, or the 538 with Justinian. So they picked the Heruli, which I forget the exact date for that, but it's in the 6th century.
To match their
Exactly, just to fit in with their doctrine.
doctrine. Yeah. Yeah, there's coming a video from myself reading a part of the book, The White Lie, and that will open many people's eyes. Even it's only a chapter and a little bit that I'm reading there. But really, this is incredible how they twist history. But it sounds so acceptable. When you hear that, you say, yeah, yeah. Oh, that sounds logical what they say.
Yeah.
But only when you really dig into it and get into real history, you see all of a sudden, no, it's just made to fix their doctrine.
Yeah.
Like their understanding of Daniel chapter 8, verse 14. 2,300 days. Again, something very important. But okay, let's continue here with James Edwin Wiley. He says, but it was in the 8th century that the most considerable addition was made to the temporal power of the popes. A singular combination of dangers at that period threatened the very existence of the papacy. The iconoclast disputes, then raging with extreme violence, had endangered a deep and lasting variance between the Roman See and the emperors of the East. That's what you see, Robert. This is just what I mentioned before, right?
Exactly,
This conspiracy then that was done between the Pope and Pepin and Charlemagne, because the iconoclast disputes, then raging with extreme violence, had endangered a deep and lasting variance between the Roman See and the emperors of the East, because the emperor of the East still was superior to the Pope, and the Pope didn't like that.
No.
The Arian kings of Lombardy, intent on the conquest of all Italy, were brandishing their swords before the very gates of Rome, while in the west the Saracens, or Mohammedans, who had overrun Africa and conquered Spain, were arrived at the passes of the Pyrenees and threatened to enter Italy and plant the crescent on the Seven Hills. Pressed on all sides, the Pope turned his eyes to France. He wrote to the mayor of the palace, and so framed the terms of his letter that Peter, with all the saints, supplicated the Gallic soldier to hasten the rescue of his chosen city and of the church where his bones reposed. Now, I'm sorry, but I'm not Tom Friess. But I have to give a little explanation to this sentence, because I think there are many of our viewers, Robert, who don't understand the way that it is written.
Okay.
He wrote to the mayor of the palace, and so framed the terms of his letter. The mayor of the palace. What is the mayor of the palace? That is the king of France. At that time, that is Charlemagne, right? And so framed the terms of his letters that Peter, with all his saints, this is of course speaking of the Pope, who calls himself the successor of Peter, with all the saints, supplicated the Gallic soldier, Gallic, France, this is Charlemagne again, he is the Gallic soldier, he is the French soldier, to hasten to the rescue of his chosen city, which of course is Rome, and of that church where his bones reposed. That is the Lateran. Okay? Now you have to understand this history to read and understand the sentence completely. It's otherwise you just read it, its words, and it doesn't say anything to you. But I hope now with this little explanation you understand the sentence a little better. And I could never do that as good as Tom did. I mean, I wish Tom was sitting here. Anyway, let's continue. The succor was not more earnestly craved than it was cordially and promptly granted. The bold Pepin had just seated himself on the throne of Pusillanimous, well, this is a strange word. So we are not speaking of Charlemagne, we are still speaking of Pepin, of the father of Charlemagne. The bold Pepin had just seated himself on the throne of the pusillanimous Childeric and needed the papal confirmation for his usurped dignity. Yeah. So the Pope Pepin had just seated himself on the throne of Childeric. This is a leader that he conquered, and he needed the papal confirmation of this superb usurped dignity. In other words, he needed the Pope to give him the keys to the city, the temporal power over the conquered regions. Bargaining for this, he girded on the sword, crossed the Alps, defeated the Lombards, and wresting from them the cities they had taken from the Greek emperor, he laid the keys of the conquered towns upon the altar of St. Peter. So, I was just a little bit forbearing with the time. We are speaking of Pepin, not of Charlemagne. This is the first time the Lombards were defeated. They were defeated by Pepin when he came from this Childeric. So that means he comes from the other side of the Alps. That means he comes from Germany. Yeah, he conquered parts of Germany there, and wanted the papal confirmation of this usurped dignity. So, bargaining for this, he girded on the sword, crossed the Alps, defeated the Lombards because they were just sitting beneath the Alps, and wresting from them the cities they had taken from the Greek emperor. Very interesting how, out of Greek came Rome. The Lombards had taken from the Greek emperor things. This is so detailed that even I don't even understand all the details yet. It's just crazy. He laid the keys of the conquered towns up to the altar of Peter. So, listen, what I'm doing right now is I'm going to show to you a picture. And that is going to make something, I hope, something a little bit more clear that I'm saying to you in a second. Here, Pepin conquers territory and gives the keys of the city, so that means the temporal power of those cities to be ruled, to the Pope. He puts them on the altar of the Pope. Now, we know that the Bible says there's nothing new under the sun, so this must have happened before, or will happen in the future again. Now, have a look at this little picture, because this is something Tom spoke about many, many times. It is the American president, Ronald Reagan, in a private meeting with Antichrist Pope John Paul II, who gives the Antichrist the United States of America with the words, "Holy Father, I give you my country." When this president was inaugurated, he faced east to Rome. And it was a sign for everyone in the know that now Roman Catholicism has a sure grip on the United States of America and on the Protestant churches in them after some 20 years after ending of Vatican II, 1965 to 1984. Holy Father, I give you my country. Tom many, many times mentioned this, and I think he even says that he somewhere read this but later couldn't find the quote anymore. This is exactly the same thing that Pepin does in the 8th century. When we are speaking here of 1984, this happened before in 774. 774, yeah. So that's 1210 years before, right? if I can count correctly. So here, the American president gives something that he has not to give because it is not his country. He gives it to the Antichrist. Like Pepin gives the conquered regions to the Pope in his time. How history repeats itself. Any comment here, Robert?
Oh, not just at the moment, yeah. No,
Yeah, because you didn't listen to my reading. I spoke
no,
about
no, I
that.
didn't listen to that. Not yet. Not yet.
I spoke about that in there.
Okay.
So, but this is a wonderful little point that we understand here. This was in the year 755. And by this act was laid the foundation of the temporal power of the popes. Again, by this the temporal foundation of the temporal power of the popes was founded, and not by what the SDA teaches, giving the Justinian decree in 538 AD, right?
Right.
The gifts thus bestowed by Pepin were confirmed by his yet more distinguished son Charlemagne. The Lombards had again become troublesome to the Pope. In fact, they were besieging him in the city of Rome. The pontiff again supplicated the aid of France. Now, weren't we just reading that in your book when you spoke about that?
We were.
This at the end of this page, as reward for Charlemagne's no, here. In 1774, the Frankish king Charlemagne defeated the Lombards on behalf of the Pope, removing the final horn standing in the way of the Pope's rise to supremacy over not just spiritual but also temporal power. This is how you wrote it, and this is how James Atkin Wiley writes about the same stuff.
Yeah.
Pepin confirmed the bestowed gifts by his yet more distinguished son Charlemagne. The Lombards had again become troublesome, so they weren't taken out with the roots by Pepin. They were just conquered, but they were not taken out by the roots. Now the son of Pepin comes, Charlemagne, and he goes again the Lombards that were besieging the city of Rome. So the pontiff was quote-unquote prisoner again in his own little castle there. The same thing as the Seventh-day Adventists tell you that he was when he was taken captive by what's this guy called there? Belisarius? Or no.
That was it.
Anyway, by Napoleon's general. He was taken captive, again the same thing, yeah. No, he was here made a prisoner of his own, like the teaching comes. This happened between 1798 and 1929, during the time the deadly wound was so-called affected. And they said the Pope didn't even leave the Vatican. That's right, the Pope didn't leave the Vatican between 1866, when Victor Emmanuel conquered Rome, and 1929 with the restoration of the Papal States through Mussolini. Yeah, but that's another healing of the wound. That's the Antichrist's healing of the wound, not the Bible's healing of the wound. Let's make that sure. Yeah? I mean, sometimes it can be a little bit confusing, but anyway, it's just fascinating history. The Lombards had again become troublesome to the Pope. In fact, they were besieging him in the city of Rome. The pontiff again supplicated the aid of France, and Charlemagne, in answer to his prayer, as his father Pepin before, entered Italy at the head of his army. Defeating the Lombards, he visited the Pope in his capital, and so profound was his deference for the See of Rome that he kissed the steps of St. Peter as he ascended, and at the interview that followed ratified and enlarged the donations of his father Pepin to the Church. A second time Charlemagne appeared in the Eternal City. The factions that now reigned in Rome threatened to put an end by their violence to the authority of the pontiff, and a third time did France interpose to save the papacy from apparent destruction. France always helped the papacy. Always. Charlemagne, says Machiavelli, Charlemagne decreed that His Holiness, being God's vicar, could not be subject to the judgment of man. Now you know where that comes from, that the Pope sees himself as the judge of all men, himself being judged by no man.
Exactly.
Charlemagne was now master of nearly all the Romanic Germanic nations of the West. And as a recompense for these repeated succors, the Pope, speaking of Leo III, on Christmas Eve AD 800, placed upon the head of the French king the crown of the Western Empire. And as I said before, this was this conspiracy that is more talked about by Tom Friess in his reading of History of Romanism. In this act, the pontiff displayed his power not less than his gratitude. As one who had crowns and kingdoms at his disposal, we behold him selecting the son of Pepin and placing upon his brow the imperial diadem. In this light, at least, have the partisans of Rome regarded the act. They have, quote-unquote, generally maintained, says Morsheim, they have generally maintained that Pope Leo III, by a divine right, and that is good that it is put in italics here, vested in him as Bishop of Rome, transported the Western Empire from the Greeks to the Franks. Whereas formerly, says Machiavelli in his History of Florence, the popes were confirmed by the emperors. The emperor now in his election was to be beholden to the pope, by which means the power and dignity of the empire declined, and the church began to advance, and by these steps to usurp upon the authority of temporal princes. What a powerful little excerpt of that book, The Genius of the Papacy by James Edgar Wiley, perfectly fitting into what we read into Rob's book, The House Built on Sand. This is so fantastic, and I enjoy myself so much reading this that I want to go on, but we have already crossed the hour.
Oh, okay.
1 hour and 6 minutes, but time flew today, and I can't wait until next time we probably meet again, and I will leave some closing remarks to my brother Rob right now. Do you have
Oh,
anything to say after my ranting on, Rob? Is there
yeah.
anything left?
Well, not really on that subject. I mean, it's such a deep subject. I mean, we could talk for weeks and weeks and years even, before we'd covered it all. It's such a huge subject. But I suppose I'd like to close tonight by speaking of the importance of prophecy within Christianity. And prophecy not only guides us into precisely identifying who the Antichrist is, as we have continued to show tonight, but it is also the greatest proof that God exists and that we can trust his word, which is found in his guidebook that he left to us to instruct and reassure us, which is the King James Bible. No other religion has a book that is crammed full of prophecy, detailing the events of Earth's history, hundreds and often thousands of years before they take place, which can be confirmed by the historical record and proven to be true. The more you study scripture, the more obvious these things become, when you see how well-known Bible stories are linked together with a deeper meaning to give a narrative that outlines God's plan for the salvation of mankind through his son Jesus. Just like the parables of Jesus, the true meaning is veiled, so the casual reader would not gain the full picture, because God wants us to put the effort in to get to know him, and as the Bible tells us, he is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. The Bible is not a book to be read once and then put away. I would recommend that you read it constantly, because the Bible is not like any other book. Each time you read it, you will make more and more connections that you never noticed before. And sometimes just understanding one tiny word in a different way can make all the difference. The Bible can often seem incredibly intimidating as it is so big. But if you set yourself a challenge to read it in 1 year, it's really not that difficult. My personal Bible has 1,129 pages, which means that I only need to read slightly over 3 pages per day to finish it in 1 year, which is not difficult to achieve once you get into a routine. The more scripture you read, the less likely you are to be deceived, as lies become more obvious when you are familiar with the story. For nearly 200 years, the Seventh-day Adventist Church has been at the forefront in relation to the interpretation of biblical prophecy, which has been trusted and spread throughout the Protestant world. As always, Satan infiltrates groups that could pose a threat and ultimately destroys them from within. And the SDA Church has been used by the Jesuits as a honey trap to control the opposition of Protestantism. True Protestants have always known that the papacy is the Antichrist, so the Jesuit-controlled SDA Church openly teaches this fact and also reveals many valuable truths about the Church of Rome in order to draw people in. Many of us, myself included, have in the past let our guard down and put too much trust in people like Walter Weiss and allowed this Trojan horse to influence our thinking. When I really started studying scripture intensively, I realized how subtle the SDA Church is and how they have twisted and manipulated scripture to fit their own doctrines and lead their followers astray, together with many others who take on some of their teachings. Rome knows that it can't fool everyone, so with the stubborn remnant, they are willing to sacrifice 90% truth about themselves, as long as they can convince you to accept and even defend 10% lies that stop you from knowing the one true God. Both Yerk and myself are dedicated to exposing all of the lies within the organized church in order to get as close as possible to the true gospel of Jesus Christ as taught by the apostles. As we work through this book, we will expose many of the false teachings of the Adventist church and prove the true understanding from scripture. We will also show that many of the accepted interpretations of prophetic events in both Daniel and the Revelation may actually be wrong, with more simple explanations being hidden in plain sight but overlooked for centuries. I'll leave it there for now, as we still have a long way to go in this chapter. So until next time, God bless, and thanks for listening.